He wanted a crown, not a constitution. That's the story tonight. A president who thinks anger is an emergency and a movement that treats power like a hammer, no matter what they smash. But in a rare clarifying moment, the Supreme Court signaled a line. You don't get to rewrite the law because you're mad at a TV commercial. Here's what happened. Trump's team has been leaning on a 1977 emergency law to slap sweeping tariffs on the world. No vote in Congress, no debate, just the stroke of a pen. The problem? That law never mentions tariffs. It talks about regulating importation during emergencies, not raising revenue, not imposing taxes, powers the Constitution puts squarely in Congress's hands.
Dealings with foreign powers, but the vehicle is imposition of taxes on Americans, and that has always been the core power of Congress. So to have the president's foreign affairs power trump that basic power for Congress seems to me to kind of at least neutralize between the two powers, the executive power and the legislative power.
Let me say two things in response to that. First, the notion that the taxes are all borne by Americans and are not borne by foreign producers whose goods are imported is empirically, there's no basis for that in the record. It's actually a mixed.
Well, who pays the tariffs? If a tariff is imposed on automobiles, who pays them?
Typically there'd be regardless of who the importer of record is, there'd be a contract that would go along the sort of line of transfer that would allocate the tariff.
Chief Justice John Roberts yesterday pressing the U.S. Solicitor General on the president's use of emergency powers to issue those sweeping global tariffs and asking who ultimately pays for the tariffs. The administration is arguing a 1977 law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, gives the president the authority to impose tariffs unilaterally during declared emergencies without congressional approval. But over nearly 3 hours of oral arguments yesterday, both liberal and conservative justices appeared doubtful, skeptical at times, noting the law, which does not explicitly mention the word tariffs, has never before been used in this way. Justice Amy Coney Barrett asks, quote, can you point to any other place in the code or any time in history where the phrase regulate importation, which are the words used in the statute, has been used to confer tariff imposing authority? And Justice Neil Gorsuch wondered if the court rules with Trump, what would prevent Congress from just abdicating all responsibility to regulate foreign commerce or, for that matter, declare war to the president? So, Joe, there are a couple things at play here. Do tariffs even fall under this law that the administration is using to use the tariffs? But then the bigger question, we heard this raised by almost all of the judges, mostly by Chief Justice Roberts, is what about Congress? Tariffs and taxes fall in the hands of that branch, not the executive branch. If we rule in your favor, this would alter the way, effectively, the two branches of government work.
Yeah, it was fascinating listening to the justices and where they were going with this. I think even people like Alito were saying, well, the president can impose tariffs, but possibly not through this vehicle, possibly.
In oral arguments, justices from the left and the right asked the obvious. Who pays these duties? And where exactly did the president get the power to collect them? Chief Justice Roberts pressed the basic civics. Tariffs are taxes, and Americans pay them at the register, in supply chains, in lost jobs. Justice Barrett drilled down on the text. Show me where regulate importation means impose tariffs. It isn't there. Justice Gorsuch warned about something deeper. If we bless this move, what stops Congress from handing over every hard decision in foreign commerce? Tomorrow, war. That's not separation of powers. That's abdication.
He's going to need another vehicle to do that. So he's doing it improperly now. I'm not saying that's how he'll rule, but that certainly seemed to be the implication. You are exactly right on Chief Justice Roberts talking, pressing who pays these tariffs. Americans pay these tariffs, of course. And so the Chief Justice pushed him there and also was very mindful of Congress's Article 1 power. He also talked about balancing that with the president's power to conduct foreign policy. But again, he's claiming an emergency based on baseball game commercials, which is, of course, absolutely ridiculous. Let's bring in MSNBC senior legal reporter and former litigator Lisa Rubin. I got to say, Lisa, the most remarkable part of that hearing was when Amy Coney Barrett had the Solicitor General on the line. And he kept trying to pull away, and she kept reeling him in, and he kept trying to pull away. He kept pulling away. She was tenacious. And finally, Justice Sotomayor, I think in an act of mercy, said, just answer her question. You're not answering her question. We all know you can't answer her question. Just admit it, basically, is what Justice Sotomayor was saying. But, you know, Amy Coney Barrett really yesterday was the one driving home the point that the statute does not fit the remedy that the administration is using it for.
Absolutely true. And Joe, you know, pity the person who comes on the other side of Amy Coney Barrett, who is precise, pragmatic, and the mother of 7 children. So if anybody is well prepared for that kind of questioning, I would venture a guess it's Amy Coney Barrett. And you're right to say that she was completely fixated on the plain text of the statute. The argument that the administration is relying upon is that the words regulate importations somehow include the power to impose tariffs. But of course, not only is the word tariff not present, as Willie just mentioned, there is nothing in the string of verbs there, as Justice Kagan mentioned, that gets to where John Sauer, the Solicitor General, wants to see the argument go. There's nothing in all of the things that the president can do under this Emergencies Powers Act that has anything to do with raising revenue, much less imposing taxes or duties. And that's where you get to the question of the larger constitutional issues about whose responsibilities really are these. And Justice Gorsuch is the one who was, like Justice Roberts, really focused on the question of, even if Congress, let's say for the sake of argument, wants to delegate those powers to the president.
Let's be honest about the motive. This wasn't about a measured policy. It was about leverage and spectacle. Emergency became whatever flashed across the screen that day. That's not governance. It's grievance with executive orders attached. And when government runs on grievance, regular people pay the bill. Higher prices, unstable supply chains, businesses yanked from one rule to the next. Uncertainty becomes policy. And here's the kicker. If a court finds the move unlawful, we're staring at a colossal mess. Where do those billions in duties go? Back to whom? Through what maze? At what cost? Trade deals cut with a weapon the president never lawfully held could unravel. That is the human cost of strongman shortcuts. Chaos, confusion, and a broken faith that rules mean what they say.
Is that a line we should draw for them? And should we police their constitutional authority for them? Because if you're going to decide that they have delegated that authority in this statute, despite the lack of plain language, can they ever get that authority back? He was sort of asking John Sauer, wouldn't they have to have a veto-proof majority, essentially, to redo an interpretation of this law? If we decide that the president can tariff under this law and Congress decides that's not what we intended at all, don't they have to survive through a veto-proof majority to get that changed? And John Sauer, really struggled with that as well.
Yeah, I'm curious. The portions of the hearing I talked about, the portions I didn't hear as much about were lines of questions about the administration's really specious use of the word emergency, of the term emergency. Like, this is a president who is claiming that when he gets pissed off while he's watching the World Series because there's a commercial about Ronald Reagan, that constitutes an emergency, and the next day he can jack up tariffs on Canada. This is a president who can get angry because his political ally who tried to overthrow an election in Brazil is actually being tried. And so he gets angry at judges down there and then jacks up tariffs to 50%. That's his emergency. It has nothing to do with anything that's in this statute. I'm curious, did they press the Solicitor General on that point?
Not so hard. Justice Kagan mentioned it at one point, and I think the reason they didn't mention it, despite its appeal to just common sense, right, is that there's an easier way out of this. Justice Barrett is sort of known on the court right now for being the person who seeks a solution that as many people as possible can glom onto and that solves a problem before the court and is few steps as possible with as few repercussions as possible, really deciding the issue squarely before her and nothing more. And right now, I think the easiest way to resolve this dispute is on that plain language of what does it mean to regulate importation. If the authority that the president is seeking is nowhere in the statute to begin with, Joe, then you don't even have to have that conversation about whether or not there is an emergency, much less a conversation about how much deference is the president owed when he alone has authority under a statute to decide whether there's that emergency.
So, Steve, justices expressed some skepticism, but we don't know how they'll rule, not yet. But let's say, for the sake of argument, they do say the president does not have the authority to impose these tariffs. They have to go away. What we've heard from Trump blustering, well, that will crush the American economy, if that's the case.
This is bigger than tariffs. It's about whether we still believe in the architecture of American freedom. Congress taxes and spends, the president executes, courts interpret, and the press, yes, the press, brings receipts. Democracy is not a vibe, it's a system. It's guardrails and sunlight and the humility to accept limits. When one man claims the power to tax by decree, that isn't strength. That's fear wearing a flag as a cape.
Can you tell us what will actually happen?
Well, it's going to be a big mess. First of all, we don't know how they're going to rule, but the prediction markets, for what it's worth, think there's over an 80% chance that the president's going to lose. So then you come to at least two, and maybe more implications for us. One is the tariffs have been bringing in a significant amount of revenue, $200 billion in the government fiscal year that just ended, projected $300 billion in the fiscal year that just started. And so maybe nobody cares about the deficit, but that is revenue. The second question is, what do you do?
Right.
Does the court order that this money be refunded? You'd think that if money was taken illegally from companies or individuals, they should get it back. But unwinding that and figuring out who gets what money, you can't even begin to imagine what that does. The third thing that is going to be an unbelievable mess is that Trump went off and did all these trade deals using these tariffs as his bargaining chip with the Europeans, with whomever. And so all those other countries are going to say, well, wait a minute, if you don't even have the authority to use the weapon that you were using to get us to do this deal, then we're out of here and no more deal. And you get to go start all over again. There's nothing that business hates more than uncertainty. And business has now been planning around a set of tariffs in terms of moving some production back here, doing this, that, and the other thing. And now they're going to have to figure out what to do next. And it could be weeks or months before we even know what this decision is. And so he has basically taken the ball and kind of thrown it in the grandstand, and there will be significant economic consequences of all of it.
So, Chris Matthews, given the message that you would think Republicans in Congress would have received this week, do they have a role in this? Do they perhaps act in a way that they haven't before on this and other issues, given the message that it appears they're getting from the American citizens?
You know, at a very time that people are rallying against no kings in this country, we don't need a king. We got rid of that 250 years ago, and we're celebrating that next year. No kings. And then Trump is trying to become king. If you look at this attempt to grab the authority over tariffs from the U.S. Congress, that is a king move. He wants to be the power man to decide on all taxes involving imports. He's clearly up to that, and he also is doing it with the filibuster. Everything Trump is doing is to grab more power and to become a king.
So let's draw our own line. We defend the rule of law because it defends us, our paychecks, our choices, our votes. We reject politics that treats the Constitution like a prop. We demand leaders who can count to Article 1 before they count poll numbers. Power without accountability is corruption. Accountability with courage, that's democracy. And it's worth fighting for, tonight and every night.